My question to you first is, when you think of a utopia, I imagine some of you think of a world without toilet paper, right? Or maybe not. Maybe for some of you that is in fact your dystopia. But this was in fact the path that Colin Beavan and his family were headed towards when they decided to live for a year with no impact in New York City. As a professor of environmental studies, I'm constantly looking for projects to engage my students in that will really help them to understand their connection to the environment and the impact they have on it. So as I was reading Colin's book, and I came across these words, and forgive me for reading, but I don't want to misquote Mr. Beavan here. He said, "I aim to go zero carbon, yes, but also zero waste in the ground, zero pollution in the air, zero resources sucked from the earth, zero toxins in the water. I didn't want to just have no carbon impact. I wanted to have no environmental impact." And I thought, all right, easy enough. This is the project. This is what my students and I are going to work on. So I came back to class inspired by Colin's book and thought, I can really get my students excited about this. I was talking it up. I was trying to motivate them. I was telling them how I was going to prepare for the project. And when I asked them to join me on this exciting journey, you can imagine my surprise when for a cold and dark week in December, I found myself having as little impact as possible, all alone. Nobody volunteered to join me. And so I kind of scratched my head and went back to the wise words of Colin to see what I should do about this. And a couple of quotes stood out for me in his book. First is it even possible to live environmentally in our modern culture? And at this point, I'm wondering, well, now I don't really know. Can I even get anybody to join me? But Colin got one person to join him, at least me. So I thought some more, and I read this quote. "The idea was to start from scratch with not a clue about how to deal with our planetary emergency and stumble forward to see what I could find out, to see how I evolved." And so I evolved. Okay, spring arrives, and I'm thinking to myself, let's do this again. But this time, we're doing it in spring, not December. And this time, I'm not asking for volunteers. It's mandatory. And this time, it's 20% of your grade. You can imagine then students got involved, right? So how did this look? How did I make this 20% of their grade? Well, there are 5 parts to the No Impact Week assignment, and we do it for a week. The first part is we read Colin's book, No Impact Man. Great read. The second part is that we keep a diary of our consumption for a week. We keep track of things like how many hours of light we have on for the day, how many minutes we spend in a shower, how much meat we might eat, how much processed food we might eat. You get the idea. So we do that for a week. We also collect and keep our trash for a week. And at the end of 5 days, we have a trash sort. And it's as disgusting as it sounds when you're looking through the trash of college students after a week. Not a lot of fun there, but what we do look at is what could we have composted that maybe we didn't? What could we have recycled that maybe we didn't? And really what we get a sense of over that week of keeping our diary and looking at our trash is our habits of consumption. So we have a good idea of things that we can now start to tackle as we try to go into the No Impact Week. The third part of this is using the Huffington Post No Impact Experiment Guide. They actually did this so that other people could join along in Colin's project, and they came up with 7 categories that you could kind of follow to do in No Impact Project Week. The 7 categories include water, energy, transportation, food, getting waste, consumption, and giving back. And so, based on this guide, I asked my students to make goals for themselves. And I asked them to challenge themselves along these categories. And we, instead of focusing on one category per day, as the Huffington Post suggests, we actually focus on all categories for 5 days. But since I do ask my students to challenge themselves, I'm not grading everybody on taking a 2-minute shower, right? That's not how this works. Instead, when I ask them to challenge themselves, I see varied goals. So for some students, a challenge is to go from a 20-minute shower to a 10-minute shower. For others, it could be going from a 6-minute shower to a 2-minute shower. And the interesting thing, too, is to see their food challenges. For some people, they want to go vegan the whole week. For other students, they're going to try to cut back from eating meat at 3 meals to eating meat at 1 meal. So you can see how different this might look for people. The fourth part of this project is to have them blog about their experience. So every day we blog about what we're going through, the ups and the downs, the good, the bad, etc. And I found the other really effective part of this is that I asked students to comment on each other's blogs. And what the comments have really done is enhanced the shared experience of the students, and it's also really helped to build a sense of community among the students. And I found this to be important, which I'll talk about towards the end. The final piece is a reflective paper and the obligatory but dreaded essay that students do on no impact. Okay, so here's what it looks like from a student's perspective. This is a day one blog, and the title, Kermit's Lesson. In the wise words of Kermit the Frog, I learned today that it's not that easy being green. My day was filled with mistakes and an increased level of consciousness before those actions that were not mistakes. I had forgotten that I had agreed to return a helium tank and some linens to a party rental store today. Unfortunately, I do not have the strength to carry a helium tank 10 miles, so I was forced to drive. I temporarily abandoned my vegan diet for the week when I subconsciously reached for a not-so-delicious cookie at the dining hall, and I quickly ripped off a paper towel in the library bathroom. But instead of dwelling on all the ways my day went wrong, I was able to go on a run. I resisted various temptations to consume one of my absolute favorite foods, cheese, and am currently writing from the library computers rather than the confinements of my own power-sucking room. During my run, I decided to perform my own experiment to test the words of my favorite superhero, No Impact Man. Does technology take away from our lives? So for the first time in a very long time, I went for a run without my iPod to determine whether or not that iPod was actually heightening my experience. I tried to enjoy the sounds of birds and trees in the wind, but these sounds were often overpowered by cars, lawnmowers, or construction. I also focused my attention on the aesthetics of my surroundings, where it was brought to my attention that this spring is in full bloom. When my run finally came to an end, I came to the conclusion that while my iPod was not inhibiting my run, it was not necessarily enhancing it either. I'm interested in applying this same question to other forms of technology, my phone, computer, or TV, but I think I'll save those for another day. So that's an example of what happens on day one, and after doing this project for a few years, I've started to notice some themes. I'll try to summarize them here. But day one typically looks like this. Students forget. And sometimes, because this is in the spring, what I read a lot about is tissue. We have somehow an obsession with disposable paper, and people seem to really miss tissue during No Impact Week. So day one, it's hard because we're forgetting, and then what we do remember is also hard because it's our first day going through this. And a lot of students will talk about their friends' reaction during that day too. Day two is actually more difficult because now they're not forgetting and they actually have to go through with the goals that they said they were going to. For some of them, they've decided to take cold showers. Go for it. But you hear a lot about how difficult it is to take cold showers. A lot of them will also talk about cutting back on meat and having limited options in the dining halls. But they also really start to now recognize those daily habits that they haven't thought about before, and that's really interesting. The third day actually is probably one of the easiest days, even though it's the middle of the week. They're now remembering their goals, they know that they can reach them, but what they're really starting to become aware of is not only their actions, but some of the actions of people around them, and you almost start to see a little bit of frustration with others. And the fourth day is kind of interesting. For some, it actually is getting easier, but for others, this is actually a really tough day, and at this point, they're ready to be done with the project, and I'm sure calling me names under their breath, which I'm glad it's under their breath and not to my face. But either way, there's some frustration at this point, and for some, they're like, how am I going to continue? I want to do this thing. So you see a mix of emotions, and again, a heightened sense of awareness about what it is they're truly doing. Day 5 is always an exciting day to see blogs because everybody's so excited that it's over. They're congratulating themselves. They're saying, way to go, good job. And they're seeming a little bit optimistic that they actually made it through and made some changes. So they're reflective and they're relieved, but they're also a little bit wary about what's going to happen next and how they're going to continue their lifestyle. And this is really interesting. So I'll show you a good example of this with the Day 5 blog. Day 5, time to reflect. This is a student, not me. Look at that, we survived. I hope you all have had time to sit and reflect on this project, particularly after class today. There seems to be a never-ending chain of bigger and bigger questions running through my head. I never thought that this project could force me to start thinking about things that I didn't ever think could be connected. For example, the idea of community that we talked about today. I didn't open Colin's book and expect to question societal values and myself as a contributor to the constant cycle of waste. But I did, and ultimately the project led to the big questions as it came to a close as well. We all went through our own personal struggles this week, but Colin's purpose is so much larger than just one person or one class. skimping on meals, and freezing in the shower. I think we all went through the same transformation as Colin did, maybe to a lesser extent, but enough to understand and begin to ask the tough questions. Let's be real. I think when everyone started, there was this, screw this, I want pizza moment too. To me, the most important thing that we should take from this week is how we will walk away from this project. We could all go back to the exact same lifestyle we were living a week ago and forget about the big questions Colin asked because we're all too busy to really spend a few minutes and ask ourselves the hard stuff. But I know I won't be able to just fall back into that old groove, and I hope a lot of you feel the same way. Here I am sitting in my room just surrounded by stuff. I have so many things. I look at my desk and see mounds of random plastic things. Ask me if these things make me happy? They don't. So here's my new goal, finding the real happiness. When Colin wrote about that, I said to myself, I want that. Ha, classic, I know. But it was a real, genuine desire to live simply and find happiness in it. So I'll leave you guys with that. Congratulations on surviving No Impact Week. Have a great weekend. Again, that was a blog from one of my students, and you see that congratulatory note there at the end. So through this No Impact experiment, can we create a sustainable utopia? Well, before I answer that, I'll tell you some of the micro lessons that we've learned through this project. The first is obviously we become more aware of our impact, and that's great. We also recognize that we can each do small things to make an impact, and that's also exciting. And perhaps as we do this together, it might build into something bigger. Some of the big things that I really notice from my students, though, are a sense of optimism and self-fortitude, which really makes me happy. And I see them starting to question societal structures that we often take for granted. And I also see them start to question their own view of the world. For instance, one of my students was talking about how he felt awkward sitting on a bench with nothing to do or nothing to listen to, and how in today's society it might be weird to just see somebody sit on a bench. And why is that? So I will say that this week for me is one of the times I'm most inspired by my students, and it's when I really learn a lot about myself. And I think the thing that's most inspiring for me is to see my class come together as a collective and start to say we when they talk about things. We affect each other. We can make a difference. And that's really important for me in the environmental field, and I hope for others that are also in the field, to see how this collective might be the piece that we are missing. We often pose environmental problems as individual challenges, but perhaps we should pose them as collective challenges and look for collective solutions to these challenges, because I think that's what really gave my students a sense of hope and a way to move forward. So I want to kind of get to the bigger lesson of this, and that is, I can find this on page 68 of Colin's book. He asks this question, or he starts with this kind of point. He says, I find myself reminded that the whole project is about not waiting around to see what might help. It is about stumbling forward and beginning to try to make a difference rather than sitting around wondering if I can make a difference. So whether it's human nature or industrial systems that need to change, when it comes to saving the world, the real question is not whether I can make a difference. The real question is whether I am willing to try. And so I think the question that I would pose is not whether we can create a sustainable utopia. I think the question is whether we are willing to try. And I really want to thank my students for trying, and I want to thank Colin for his inspiration. Thank you.